I'm the Wrathful Proser. You're listening to Ink Noir, where the worlds of true crime and writing collide. What happens when kids become killers? How much responsibility do we give them for their actions? What about when they reach adulthood? In the news, we've heard the names the Menendez Brothers and Gypsy Rose Blanchard. They became part of a often misunderstood part of history. But what were the reasons for their murders? In many cases, the children who become killers have a long past of abuse. Do we forget that torture of these innocent kids happened? Do we excuse their behaviors completely? There are millions of victims of childhood abuse who don't become killers. But what happens in the minds of these children that end up with their parents dead and them facing life behind bars or even the death penalty? There are several reasons why children might commit these tragic acts of killing their parents, called parricide. Some factors are abuse, mental illness, antisocial behavior, family dynamics, the influence of others, and financial gain. A lot of these will overlap too, and that creates a more complicated case. But understanding all the reasons can help prevent such tragedies and give the necessary support and intervention for at-risk kids. In the case of Ann Perry and Pauline Parker, Pauline's mother was the victim of a horrific crime. Honora Reaper Parker was killed by her daughter Pauline with the help of Pauline's friend Juliet Hume, which we know now is the mystery writer Ann Perry. Honora was hit repeatedly in the head with a piece of a broken brick until she was killed. Ann Perry at the time, was known as Juliet Hume, was an English girl who befriended Pauline, who was a native to New Zealand and had more of an urban background, which we are reminded of frequently when reading about this crime. Juliet helped Pauline kill Honora, the motive being the girls wanted to be together and Honora wouldn't have it. But like the other crimes of the other children mentioned, it wasn't all black and white, and this wasn't actually the reason for the murder itself. These kids all had something in common. They were abused in some way by their parents. Gypsy Rose's mother had Munchausen's by proxy, a mental illness that causes the person to make someone else sick or helpless in a way so they can be the hero or the caretaker. Gypsy's mother kept her in a wheelchair, even though she could walk. Dee Dee created a daughter who was wheelchair-bound with countless ailments, diseases, and other conditions. She had all of her child's teeth ripped out and a stomach feeding tube placed for no reason except to gain sympathy and donations. Erik and Lyle's father was a sexual abuser, and not only to his own children, but to members of the music group Menudo. One, unfortunately, who took his own life because of that abuse. Pauline's mother was physically and mentally abusive towards her daughter, wanting to control every aspect in Pauline's life. Gypsy wanted freedom from her mother, as did Erik and Lyle and Pauline. And Anne was helping a friend who needed her. The Menendez brothers are still in prison, fighting to finally be free after spending decades behind bars. Gypsy, Anne, and Pauline all served their time under a decade and were released. But these kids didn't get any mental health help in prison or after. They were just tossed back into society, which had its own ideas about kids who kill. They then are forced to grow up assuming social norms, but failing miserably. Gypsy is floundering, surrounded by a team of people who seem not to care about her at all, and just thrusting her into a spotlight that she knows nothing about except the negative parts, which is filled with regrets, resentments, and love for a mother that she helped kill. She spent her life tortured and abused and then locked up, only to be released with no idea how to human. Because she, like so many of these violent children, were never treated like humans by their parents, and most likely not treated that way in prison either. So should we expect Gypsy or any of these kids, now adults, to act like everyone else? How should we feel, the people of society who judge them? Should we be absolute in our emotions, shutting them off for people like Gypsy or Erik and Lyle? Should we be more open to their past and how they were raised to understand them better? Do they deserve any amount of grace? Such as Pauline, who was slapped 7 times in a row by her mother, and in the movie Heavenly Creatures, which discusses the lives and murder of Pauline, Anne, and Honora, show her getting slapped once. But not only was that not true, it was also ignored that Pauline was raped multiple times, and she was 14. The perpetrator was a college professor assistant, and he was just kicked out of the boarding house that was Pauline's mother's. And instead of punishing the adult male, Pauline, the child, was punished instead. Parricide, though rare, seems to be filling up our news with kids who've murdered family or friends. We are quick to grab the pitchforks, understandably, and start charging these teen perpetrators. But I think we often forget that they're children, and the adults in their lives are supposed to protect them and teach them. Yet instead, in these cases, the adults are the ones who failed them in the first place. So where does the responsibility lie? Who do we blame for these killer kids? Society, parents, or the children themselves?